Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Hegreberg, and this is Heresy, or using Vim in a Microsoft ecosystem. Now, I'm a computer engineer. In college, I mostly worked on embedded systems. I did a lot of low-level work, so VHDL, assembly, C, that kind of stuff. And working with low-resource systems, I kind of fell in love with small, clean, tight software that did one job and did it really, really well. So I started using Vim because Vim not only was available on every system I was working on, it worked exactly the same. I wasn't using some cut-down stripped proprietary editor that was just happened to get packed with whatever I got from whatever proprietary software I got. So I started using Vim, and it was great. Then I started using it for regular code, and I really, really liked it. I learned that every day I could get better with Vim. I could excel at it, and I could learn more every single time I use it. I could get better, I could become excellent. And I just thought that was really cool. And I never wanted to leave it. I spent a lot of time configuring it just how I liked, getting everything where I was, making it all under my fingers, making it quick, making it easy. And then I got this job working in local government. And something you need to know about government is all of it is Microsoft. It's Microsoft everywhere, top to bottom. Part of that's familiarity. You know, governments don't move quickly, so they got used to using Microsoft, and they're just going to be there forever. But part of that's also compliance, right? You're handling a lot of sensitive information. There are a lot of laws around how you're allowed to handle that and who you're allowed to handle it with. Microsoft makes it easy to handle a lot of those very sensitive, compliant things because they're registered, they're cleared by all of the appropriate agencies, and they're good to go. So we have Microsoft at work. The question is, how can I use Vim, right? Because I have to deal with Windows. We're pushing stuff onto Azure, and we're using all these Azure frameworks. I'm working with C#, I'm working with .NET stuff, and that really wants you to use Visual Studio, right? Because it's C# and .NET and ASP have all been built for Visual Studio. They're kind of this big, giant Microsoft ball. I have PowerShell, right? I need to write PowerShell scripts all the time to embed with whatever I'm working on, to talk to the framework I'm at, to just fix all of the things that you can't do because Microsoft doesn't expose all of the tools you need to do your job within their own portals. So 90% of the time to get something done, you have to revert to PowerShell. But most importantly, I want my work to be maintainable by other people. I could probably write things in a different language I like C or Haskell or whatever, and I could maintain it, and I could build it, and it would work, and it'd probably work with whatever else was there. But what if I'm sick, right? What if I'm gone? What if I'm busy doing something else and someone else needs to work on my code base? Well, all of a sudden they can't because everyone else at work is using Visual Studio, they're using .NET, they don't know what I'm working on, they don't understand it. So it's important that what I'm doing is maintainable by other people around me. So I need to make sure that the way I use Vim plays nice with everyone else that I'm working with. There are a couple different ways I could accomplish this. You can actually install Vim within Windows. There are graphical tools like gvim. You could run it through PowerShell or even command prompt if you want, and this makes it feel like the rest of Windows, but it's not really a good experience, at least for me. A huge benefit to Vim is that it's built inside Linux, and that you have the whole Unix set of tools. You have all of those wonderful GNU tools right at your fingertips all the time, and you lose all of that if you're working within PowerShell or command prompt. So I wanted to have a real Linux shell. Fortunately for us, we have this tool called Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL, and WSL's great. WSL lets you have real, full Linux with everything you could possibly want while you're stuck inside Windows. So I have all the tools I want. I have it configured exactly the same way that I have on my Linux laptop at home, and it's just wonderful. If you aren't familiar with WSL, there's two different versions. There's version 1, which works mostly via black magic and some crazy integration layer that translates the commands through into Windows. And then there's WSL 2, which is actually a proper VM. And for a long time, I only used WSL 1, but mainly because that's all that was out when I got used to it, and I didn't see any reason to change. I heard that WSL 2 was slower crossing the OS barrier, like working on Windows files in Linux and Linux files in Windows, so I just never really looked into it. But eventually I realized that things that were supposed to be quick weren't anymore. Building software took a long time. I opened Vim once after adding a couple plugins, and it took over a second to load, and that's just unacceptable. That's just way too long to have, Vim's supposed to be quick and instant and amazing. So I tried out WSL2, and I thought it was really, really fast. It took about a second to boot up the first time you launch it from your computer, but after that, it's really, really, really quick. So I wanted to test it, and it turns out it's about 5 times faster. I compiled neovim a couple times on a laptop running WSL1 and running WSL2. And it's just so much faster. So even if there is a tiny loss of performance crossing that OS barrier, it's completely dwarfed by how much faster WSL2 is. Another challenge I had was I wanted to make working in Windows and working in Linux feel the same. I didn't want either one to feel like it was a compromise, right? Like, because I still have to do things from Windows. So I want my files where they're supposed to be for working on them in Windows, and I want my files where they're supposed to be in Linux. Initially, I symlinked my project file from Linux over into my Windows documents. But Windows doesn't like that. Windows doesn't really understand symlinks very well, especially if they're coming from Linux. So it just threw a big fit. So what I did instead was, fortunately, your entire C directory is loaded under Mount C when you're using Whistle. So instead I symlinked my project's file from my Windows documents into Linux. So now I can interact with both of them at the same time, and everything just works. It feels great. I wouldn't even notice that I was working in Whistle when I'm in Whistle. It just feels like normal Linux. At home, I used Arch. I use Arch a lot. I really like it. I like how much power and freedom it gives you over how you're interacting with Linux. But for a long time, I didn't use it with Whistle, mainly because it wasn't officially supported. Debian and Ubuntu and a couple others were, but Arch wasn't in there. So I just used Debian and I was fine with it. Debian's really low maintenance. Debian's really stable. It's great. But a couple weeks ago, I ran into a problem where the version of Debian I had too old of a version of OpenSSL to allow me to have two different ASP servers talking to each other to test some APIs. And trying to get that fixed and moving Debian versions while you're using it was such a headache. I gave up, and I'm switching over to Arch. There's ways to install any distribution you want into Whistle, actually. So I'm in the process of switching everything over to Arch. It's been great. I feel like I'm home again. As far as working in C#, that's probably the biggest problem for a lot of people trying to use Vim and trying to work with Linux, right? Because C# is this giant Microsoft framework. And for a long time, you couldn't really do .NET on Linux. I mean, you could try. You could use Mono, but there are a lot of problems. There are a lot of missing features. But since .NET 5 came out, .NET Core, which is the cross-platform version, has all the same features in Linux as it does in Windows. So I installed .NET Core into Whistle. I do all of my development from there, and it feels exactly the same. I can actually build Windows exes, deploy them to my Windows server, and run the automation tests while staying in Linux. And it all works. It knows what it's supposed to do. I just tell it the architecture I'm building for, and it's fine. The .NET CLI tool is actually pretty good, too. It has all the different templates, all of the different testing frameworks, and everything else, even debugging, that you could possibly want from Visual Studio. And it lets you run it from the command line. So far, I've not found a single feature of Visual Studio that I haven't been able to do with the .NET CLI. I'm sure they're out there, but I've been able to get everything that I've ever looked for. You can even get NuGet working, and I've aliased all of the .NET tools into reasonable names so it feels like it's part of Linux, so I don't feel like I'm doing this weird extra Microsoft thing. And then for LSP, I'm using OmniSharp, which I'm pretty sure is maintained by Microsoft, and it works great. PowerShell is super important because PowerShell is hooked into every Microsoft product. It's hooked into Active Directory. It's hooked into Azure. It's hooked into Excel even, I guess, if that's something you wanted to interact with programmatically. So I need to be able to use it. So I keep 3 versions of PowerShell on my computer. I have the built-in version 5. I have PowerShell 7 for some weird stuff I need to try new features with. And then I have PowerShell Core installed in Linux. Now, most of the time, I end up using the include Windows version, even when I'm inside Whistle, because I can call the Windows exes from Whistle and they run in command line. It's actually pretty cool, because I want to make sure that any scripts I'm writing, any modules I'm building, are usable by my coworkers, right? And not everybody's going to be installing PowerShell Core or PowerShell 7, so it's just easier to use the included version 5 for most things. I actually even have my LSP configured to run the LSP engine using the Windows PowerShell, although I've had a lot of problems with that. The PowerShell LSP is called PowerShell Editor Services, and it's maintained by Microsoft. It's been the hardest one for me to actually integrate with the rest of my configuration. I had to do a lot of fiddling. I tried to compile it myself like 6 times. Eventually, I gave up and had to download their binaries and use that. I still can't figure out how to get it to recognize imported modules. I have an open issue with their GitHub, but we haven't figured it out yet. So if I have any standard modules, everything with the LSP works fine. But trying to import any custom modules just hasn't worked. I've tried importing them into a live session while going. I've even tried modifying the actual PowerShell editor scripts to force importing them before it loads it, but I haven't figured it out. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just haven't gotten there yet. So if any of you have done that and you know how to do it, please let me know, because that'd be really cool. I wanted to show you a couple things about my configuration and how I use Whistle. So this is Arch, right? And then W2 launches just like a Windows program. And it's right there, and you can get everything you want. I have all of my dot files in Stow. So I have this dot files folder, right? And you can see everything there. There's a couple things that are kind of relevant here. So if you see, most importantly, we have, there's a couple things that are kind of relevant here, and I'm getting some weird echo. So if you see, most importantly, we have, okay, there's a couple things. So I have here, and I'm getting some these .NET tools added to my path. That allows me to run any .NET tools just like they are another tool within Unix. So I don't have to talk to .NET and then talk to whatever global tool I'm running. I can just use it like it's a proper Unix tool. You have to have this line here because, as you know, Microsoft spies on you all the time, and they promise that if you put this line, you have this environment variable running in your shell, they're not spying on you. I don't know if I believe it, but I put it there anyway. I have auto-completion attempted to be set up. It's Microsoft, and for some reason they don't follow the standards, so you have to do this. And it kind of works. It gives you all of the autocomplete for the first word, but it doesn't give you any autocomplete for any following things. So I can get .NET New, .NET Build, .NET Run, but it won't give me autocomplete for like the templates within my shell. And those are things I usually forget. So most of the time I actually still have to look up the templates. Fortunately, I only use like 2 or 3. I think that's the only thing that's super useful in here. But I have the session template I use. Oh, pardon me. That automatically sets up tmux, calls a session, builds everything together. And it can call from my project directory, which is symlinked over. And because the symlinks are there, it can call all of the files on Windows just like they're in Linux. And I can get everything I need. And I can open a template. I can show you how that works. It's actually pretty cool. So I can type work, because I have an alias for it. I can type a name of any project. Well, I just set this up. So let me just do this. Yeah. So it says, hey, look, this is the project you're in. Here I have a shell to do whatever I want with. Here I have my Vim set up. Everything is all good. I've also got this wrapper for a .NET tool. A lot of the .NET like automated code generating tools that help you like build templates are super wordy and they have a billion flags. So instead of remembering them, I just build. So this builds out API scaffolds if I'm building a new web API. Oh, they asked if I could zoom in. Let me see. Give me just a second here. There we go. Hopefully that's a little easier to see. Sorry about that. But yeah, so this adds all the packages to the project I need to work on. It installs the tool if it's not there, and then it calls the tool with all the settings I need to add my controller. So it means I don't have to remember all the weird Microsoft syntax. I can have it work the way I want and the way I like. As far as plugins go, I've got most of its well, I have syntax highlighting coming from these. I don't like the way that neovim does C# syntax highlighting by itself, but this plugin does a really good job. And then I have my LSP stuff down here. So you see this calls out to PowerShell, other services I have in my LSP folder, and then it has the .exe on there, which means it's supposed to be calling out to the Windows version of PowerShell, although I suspect it's actually not. I've done some tests recently, and I don't think it's actually talking to Windows at all, even though it says it's supposed to here. So that's the next thing I'm going to investigate. OmniSharp's really easy, relatively. There's way less to configure, and it just works automatically. That's all I had specifically to show you. I've got some snippets and stuff I built out too, but those are all pretty standard. I have time for some questions if there are any of those, or anything specific you want me to show you or talk about. Oh, am I still muted?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, awesome. I thought it was really cool. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about like were there any things that you felt it was pretty difficult to get started with using WSL that you sort of overcame otherwise in terms of either like I don't know, shared file systems or anything like that, or did you
Yes.
feel yeah, go ahead.
So there are a couple of things that don't work very well, specifically with working with .NET. .NET uses these developer certs to handle like their test server. That way you can run it on localhost and get HTTPS working. And because my host operating system isn't actually Linux, it's a nightmare. All you're supposed to be able to do is it's like dev certs HTTPS trust, and if you enter that, it's supposed to load it. It doesn't work with Whistle. So what you have to do is you have to install .NET on Windows, run it on Windows, export the certificate, import it into Arch, add it to .NET, and then add it to your certs with however your operating system handles certs. So with the Trust Anchor and Arch or update CA certificates, I think is how Debian does it. And it's really hacky. I got it working. It's not. This is not the computer I normally do work on, which is why you're seeing the error because I don't have that configured. But
Mm-hmm.
once you get it working, it's really nice. It's not documented very well anywhere. I should probably write up a little. I should probably write that up and just publish it somewhere because it took forever to get working.
Yeah, cool. If you do that, I'm sure we could link it later in the bottom of the video for this talk or something, which
Okay.
people I'm sure will run into as time goes on. Do you
Yeah.
feel the performance of like neovim on WSL feels like better than using Visual Studio, or what you see like happening when your coworkers are working?
Yes. I mean, they'll open Visual Studio, and I mean, I could go make lunch. It feels like while it's opening. Now with WSL1, there were some problems, but that's because I don't honestly understand how WSL1 works because it's not actually a
Hmm.
VM. But with
Yeah,
WSL2, it's great. I mean, you can see it's there, right?
yeah,
And everything's immediately accessible.
yeah. Nice fuzzy finder, by the way.
Yeah, it works pretty good.
um, No, very cool. So I think the last one is do you have a lot of people I know have experienced difficulties with like IO slowness between WSL and Windows, but do you not have that experience very often or
People, they're supposed to be, but I mean, it feels pretty fast. I mean, mostly I'm just editing text, and if I have something really heavy, I can copy it over. But I've not
mm-hmm.
encountered any serious problems. I mean, the fastness of them way overpowers that compared to
Yeah.
like doing anything in Visual Studio. Because I occasionally I do open Visual Studio because I feel like I need to understand how everyone else works, and even doing a simple like, hey, add this controller here and hook it to this takes forever.